Hi, y'all, and welcome to the Lunchtime Live on the Natalie Cochran case. I am curious how many of y'all have been watching the trial, waiting for lunchtime, and what a morning. This is seriously one of the most interesting cases that we followed. I do not understand why it doesn't have much more following, but it was wild this morning. And I won't say anything. I want your opinions. What did you think about this morning? I'll wait a couple of minutes before I say anything, but oh my gosh, it was crazy. With the lunchtime live, what I'm trying to do while you're waiting for things to happen again and just staring at a blank screen that says, nothing except, waiting for the trial to start again, waiting for the jury, whatever, then why not come over here? We'll talk about what happened. We'll do a little download, but mostly I wanted to give you some more information. I have some additional information that I just don't have time to cover when we're doing it in the afternoons or evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern. I try to cover what happened that day at trial. This is extra, but I think it's really important context. It's not coming into the trial. And so the only way you're going to find out about it is if we cover it separately or do something more. So that's why I'm trying to cover this. Let me make sure. Yep, good. Y'all can hear and see me. Excellent. Yes, I see. Thank you, Bama Queen. Would you hit the like button? I would really appreciate that. It'll help the video get out to more people. If you would also subscribe, we would love to have you back for more videos. So let's talk a little bit about the topic today because, and I've asked, if you're just coming in, what did you think about this morning? Dramatic. Am I right? It was crazy dramatic. And I was, I'll just go ahead and say a dumpster fire for the defense. Like, wow, wow. Anyway, but I'm curious what y'all think. So go ahead and put that in. It was, and anyway, we will talk about that. All right. So what we're going to talk about today, I want to just sort of ask you to think about the question, how mad would you be if a friend lied to you? And then kind of expand that to how mad would you be if they talked you into investing in a company that turned out to be nothing but a scam? And then I'm going to add a little detail. What if that person is actually one of your close friends or even a relative? Because that is what you were going to hear today. We are going to be looking at the transcript from the sentencing hearing for this same defendant, Natalie Cochran, in the Ponzi scheme trial. That was in federal court a couple of years ago. There wasn't a trial there. She pled guilty. So all that we have that gives us any information about it really is what the witnesses themselves said at the sentencing hearing. These are victims who came and made a victim impact statement to the court. Now, remember, there's no cross-examination. Natalie's team doesn't get to prove that they're wrong. They just come in and they make a statement without anyone questioning it or asking any details around that. So you are going to hear these people absolutely unleash on Natalie Cochran. And these are her friends. These are her relatives. These are people who were scammed by her Ponzi scheme, which we heard some really amazing information this morning, some text messages we had not seen before that came into evidence this morning about Natalie's statements about what was happening to multiple people, by the way, about what was happening with these contracts, which, as it turns out, just didn't exist. There were no contracts that the company had with government entities. They weren't actually selling arms to the federal government. They didn't have military supply contracts for the government. So although she told people big, huge numbers, $1.4 billion will be hitting our account soon. In fact, that was never going to happen. There were no contracts like that. So we're going to look at the court transcript and look at what made them just as angry at her, just as angry as they were. So the trial we're watching, many of us on multiple channels that are covering it, is a murder trial. And every night at 7 p.m. Eastern, I go live and talk about that. But in terms of the murder trial, the Ponzi scheme is not technically relevant in the sense that it doesn't make it more likely that she committed a murder. You know, you could be somebody who rips people off and never ever kill somebody. And other way around, you could kill somebody and never run a Ponzi scheme. So those two things could be separate. In this case, the state has argued, I thought completely unconvincingly, up until today. That's what we're going to talk about tonight at 7 p.m. Don't miss it. Be sure to hit the subscribe button with notifications on. But they have argued Michael Cochran had no idea about what was going on with the Ponzi scheme. Natalie deceived him, they said, just like she deceived everybody else. It was all Natalie. And that, the state says, is why she murdered him. So we're going to look back at the reason for the murder, the Ponzi scheme itself. Now, there were a lot of victims. I don't know if we'll cover them all in this amount of lunchtime, but we'll try. We'll get through as many as we can. The federal prosecutors say this was run as a Ponzi scheme, meaning just a very few investors put in some money and then they got paid back, but not with contracts, not with money that was actually earned by the company, instead with new investors. And then those new investors were expecting to get their money back, plus some interest, plus some return. And the only way they got anything back was if Natalie managed to get another layer of investors. And it went on like that. So it wasn't such a big scheme that there were all that many layers. And frankly, we know very little about who got paid back and what got paid back. From what I see, it seems like pretty much everybody lost money without getting much back. There were apparently at least a few people who got some money back. But the idea behind a Ponzi scheme is the money that goes to those initial investors that makes them so happy that they praise the company. That's kind of fake because it's really just new investors. It's not the company actually making money. So all the way through here now that we're going to talk about the Ponzi scheme, but there are a lot more allegations that you're going to hear all scattered throughout here. And we'll talk about those as we get to them. So sometime probably tonight or tomorrow, the jury is actually going to decide this case. I believe they will get this case today. There are going to be closing arguments. There will be instructions from the judge, and bam, the jury will have the case. So when will they make their decision? I don't know, but we will go live whenever that is. We will go live when that happens. So for our purposes, we don't have a ton of detail, but you do get to hear from the victim. So let's go ahead and, let me go ahead and tell you who the first witness you're going to hear from is. First victim is a man named Chris Davis. We also heard him testify at the murder trial, if you've been following it. He was very close to Michael, good friends with him. He was the one who says he insisted that Michael be taken to the hospital. By the time he got there, it was 6:30 at night, but Michael had been passed out since at least 12:30 when Natalie sent the photograph of him lying on the kitchen floor, passed out. So he'd been unconscious all that time. And Chris said he piled Michael into the back of his car and said, "We're going to the hospital. I don't understand the delay. We're going now." A couple other small details. The Cochrans, for some reason, Natalie and her husband, Michael, bought a house for Chris Davis's aunt. I never understood that. It's just kind of bizarre. The son of Natalie and Michael mentioned maybe the aunt was going to pay them interest, or not interest, rent. And even so, it's kind of odd still. I just don't understand why they didn't just say they bought a rental house and Chris's aunt happened to want to move into it. Not that they bought Chris's aunt a house, because after all, Chris's aunt, I just don't understand why they were involved in that. But in any event, here you go. Here's what Chris had to say. Let's add it to the stage. And I got my mouse, so that's good. So it should be a little easier to page through this. All right. So Mr. Davis says, we understand that you've read our impact statements from November. However, we're concerned that they do not portray the actual shock and disgust that we all felt in June 2019 when Natalie's Ponzi scheme was exposed. Just as Ms. Bolt said, and that is Michael's mother. I did her victim impact statement and her husband's, Michael's stepfather's victim impact statement separately. You can go back and check that out. I think it was Friday. Just as Ms. Bolt said, financial devastation can be defined, but emotional, spiritual, and psychological effects are indescribable. You know the economic impact that she's had on all of us here today. Specifically, she stole $511,000 from us standing here, Mr. Miller, myself, and Mr. Gray. We are thankful for this opportunity to address this court and Natalie Cochran directly. First, we want to thank the U.S. Attorney's Office and the tireless work of the investigators. We strongly believe her Ponzi scheme would be flourishing today without their skills and expertise. Our statement today is not about anger. It's about truth. King Solomon in Proverbs 14:30 says, "Envy rots the bones." Natalie's envy drove her feelings of entitlement. She lived a life of entitlement that we all paid for and will continue to pay for decades to come. She felt entitled to our finances, our lives, our reputations, our futures, our securities, and our retirements. Now, we're simply asking the court to follow her perspective in life and give her exactly what she's entitled to, 11 years and 3 months in a federal penitentiary. And spoiler alert, that is exactly what the court gave her, the maximum amount allowable for what she had pled guilty to. Our lives will be troubled far longer than 11 years, and it took more than 11 years to accumulate the resources she deviously stole, kept, and lived carefree on for several months. Why should her punishment be any less than the impact it will have on the dozens of her victims? According to Natalie's plea, there are 2.4 million reasons why 11 years is insufficient from the victim's perspectives. Now, that is the amount she was admitting she had taken. This was not just about money. Money was simply the byproduct of her malicious intent. This is not some drug dealer or some user trying to feed a habit. Her actions were maliciously and purposefully calculated to steal from those very people who trusted her. Evil has an ordinary face. It laughs, it cries, it deflects, it rationalizes, and in this case, it claims to be your friend. She's not a victim, Your Honor. She's vicious. Manipulative people like Natalie do not understand the concept of boundaries. They are relentless in their pursuit of what they want, and they have no regard for who gets hurt along the way. She knew the damage before she stole the first dime. So you can see, I'm holding absolutely nothing back. He is really angry, just lambasting her. This is absolutely outrageous what you've done. Evil, he calls her. Manipulative, not a victim. And he's asking the court to give the maximum. He and everybody else on this long list, well, except one. What she's asking this court now to consider for leniency was not enough to stop her in her criminal activities 2 years ago. Once again, we are all supposed to care when she could care less. So what he's talking about is she's saying, look, I need to be with my children. My children will be motherless. And he's saying, you didn't care about anything or anyone when you did this to us. And now we're supposed to care about you. Your Honor, today you are the gatekeeper between fact and fiction. Here's a fact. Natalie is a matter of fraud and deceit. We look back at the phony spreadsheet that she provided to us and other victims regarding contracts. We haven't seen that in the murder trial, by the way. We've seen some documents, but frankly, very few. It had factor fees, defaults, payouts. This document was not created accidentally or mistakenly. It was with purposeful and predatory intent, the details to deceive. This same fraudulent intent to deceive was led to the creation of other additional documents in which we were provided. We were given a document from the Bank of America promising the deposit of $29 million. And we did hear a little bit about that in the case, in the murder trial, because Mr. Treadway testified, and he said he was asked about this fake document from the Bank of America, apparently with letterhead that looked realistic. And he was asked whether he, as a graphic designer, had helped Natalie, we'll talk about it in just a minute, perpetrate this fraud. And of course, he denied that. But we do know that this document was faked. We, the public, we didn't see that. But this particular document he was asked about when he took the stand in the murder trial. We were given a document of an email from Dun and Bradstreet promising the deposit of $348 million. We were given letters from Senator Joe Manchin's office indicating that he was assisting her in her frozen accounts. All of these documents in time directed directly to Natalie. That is a fact, not fiction. And one of the things that we have heard a little bit about in the murder trial is this constant promising that she would be able to pay these people back, that there was money coming in. There was obviously a lot more of that involved in the Ponzi scheme case. This is just a little window into what happened in that case that we're not going to hear about in the murder trial. It was not a poor choice for her to join the business, as she and her lawyer claimed in the Register Herald. It was her explicit choice to create it and then portray it as a flourishing federal contracting business. Simply look at her application to the federal government. She directed us before our investment to visit the website to look where Tactical Solution Group was listed. That's one of Natalie and Michael's companies. And just as the bolts indicated, it was woman-owned, woman small business, and it was actually a specific medical qualification that only Natalie had. This is a fact, not fiction. It is overwhelming evidence that she operated the company at her discretion. Now, all of that is really relevant and important to the murder trial because the state has said she was in charge of this whole company. And then the defense has said the two of them ran it together. They've said, yeah, Natalie was involved. She was a scammer. She cheated people, but she had no reason to murder Michael, her husband, because he was in on the scheme with her. What good does it do her to murder him? The state is saying, no, he didn't know about the scheme. So what they're saying through here is Natalie for sure knew about it, that Natalie ran the company, and they believe that because it operated as a woman-owned business. In the United States, there are preferences given for certain contracting entities. In other words, businesses that are woman-owned, minority-owned, disadvantaged person-owned. There are all these various set-asides or special contracts where, in order to include, there are special provisions made to hire those particular businesses. And what she was telling everybody is, our business is woman-owned. That means we get into these special contracts. We have a chance to get these special contracts. That's how and why we're doing so well on our business. We don't know a lot about that. I'm explaining that more generally. That's how the DBE, MBE sort of entities work. The fact that all the witnesses here, when you hear from everyone, you'll hear they all communicated directly with her regarding contract solicitations, descriptions, updates, payments, renewals, etc. Huge issue, by the way, in the murder case. Of course, I'm referring to the fake contract she was peddling. The excuse she offers today and in the media that she joined her husband's business with honest intentions, as if she was an unwilling participant, is disgustingly false and as worthless as the contract she sold us. Speaking from experience, Your Honor, don't buy it. The fact that her crimes didn't stop after her husband, Mike, passed away. They actually increased and became more aggressive. Ultimately, as victims, we were told, since you can't get your money, just reinvest with her. This is a fact, not fiction. So, and we do have some evidence of that, of people being in the murder trial, people being asked to reinvest, but very, very little. Frankly, there's just not a lot of information about the Ponzi scheme. We know that there was one. We understand that she acknowledges it. The defense has acknowledged that, yes, she admits it. She was involved, but we don't have a lot of detail about it. So why didn't she stop? Continuing with Chris Davis's statement, to stop was not an option for her narcissism, and it didn't matter who the victims would be on either side. I would like to think that anyone who maliciously steals millions of dollars from friends and family would now experience post-traumatic stress disorder. But this is self-inflicted trauma and it's self-inflicted stress. This attempt to abuse her own medical training and continuing to manipulate other medical professionals is not only predictable, but it's transparent. She was not traumatically forced to steal $2.5 million. She was not traumatically forced to take elaborate vacations, purchase cars, a boat, motorcycles, ATVs, and other luxury items while remodeling her home and living the high life on everyone else's money. Was she forced to enjoy these luxuries? I think not. Yet, this is what each victim here today has had to watch and suffer through for the last 2 years. It's nothing less than insulting to the victims here today, who she confidently approached with a braggadocious demeanor of her successful woman-owned federal contracting business. This foolishness is just further victimization of every victim here today and allowing her to continue to deny accountability. Now, we actually heard a little bit of this today, just minutes ago at the trial today, as the defense cross-examined the state's one and only rebuttal witness, because the defense was trying to prove that it was really Michael who enjoyed all these luxuries. And that's what Natalie's children got on the stand and testified to also in the murder trial. They said that it was Michael who wanted the luxury goods like Louis Vuitton purses, that it was Michael who bought the boats, Michael who wanted a hangar for his airplane, Michael who wanted an airplane. All of those sorts of things were Michael wanting to spend the money, not Natalie wanting to spend the money. Although, frankly, that's not exactly the point. I mean, the point isn't really who spent the money. The point is the fraud behind it. And then in the murder case, whether or not that was a motive. But really, the issue of who spent the money is kind of irrelevant. Okay, none of the victims here today did anything to cause her traumatic stress. She should save that for her next trial, which will be where we are right now today. Her Ponzi scheme now moves from economic to emotional. It's the same concept. Lure new victims in and use their emotions to pay back the previous people who cared. This is evil personified, yet again, predictable. Thank you, Crypto Tax Lawyer. I appreciate that. So, yes, there is, in fact, a Crypto Tax Lawyer is pointing out that they will be charging the jury on a lesser included. And the judge even made a comment today like, well, we haven't told the jury, may be kind of surprised. This is coming out of the blue. We haven't told them anything about it. So involuntary manslaughter will be an option for the jury. It was not in the original indictment, but it will be up. So thank you very much, Crypto Tax Lawyer, for your comment. I appreciate that. Okay. Her Ponzi, I already read that. To understand what we've dealt with, I quote Dr. Sam Vaknin. He's an author, professor, and he's a self-confessed narcissist. Wow. And he says narcissists live in a fantasy land all their own, in which they are the center of the universe, admired, feared, held in awe. They hold themselves immune to the consequences of their actions and the inactions. Therefore, beyond the punishment of the law of man, they often find themselves on the receiving end of investment scams. In other words, they're the ones doing the investment scam, believing they're destined to greatness. They have unreasonable expectations and especially favorable treatment, and are upset. I wonder if he, yes, okay, and are upset when the way they treat people. They do not automatically comply with their expectations. They feel entitled to money, power, and honor, and commensurate with their accomplishments or toils. I think they mean not commensurate with. They are rudely shocked when they are penalized for their misconduct or their fantasies remain just that, end quote. So he's called her evil. He's called her a narcissist, clearly angry. And we heard him testify at trial. Her greatest suffering is not separation, Your Honor. It is the four walls of eternal irrelevance, rejection, humiliation, defeat. That is such a good line. Her greatest suffering is not separation, but the four walls of eternal irrelevance, rejection, humiliation, defeat. But Judge, you are the only one who can express it and enforce it. She doesn't listen to anyone else but her own ego. She's now required to listen to you. We respectfully ask that you speak bold and loud and with the authority she needs to hear, and that it's overdue. We know justice is blind, but we hope today she's not deaf. Our voices stop with you, but you have the authority to allow these voices to echo for 11 years and 3 months, which is exactly what the judge did. And that's the sentence he gave her. Don't silence the victims, Your Honor. This sentencing today will be based on fact and not fiction. Although she is now relevant or irrelevant, make our losses relevant. She's asking the court to consider her family, and we're simply asking you to likewise consider all the victims and all of her victims' families. I don't envy your job or the decision that you have to make today, but I do remind you, you are not only the Honorable Judge Frank Volk, you are, and he names all the victims, and you can see a lengthy list there. You're the late Jonathan Miller. You're his wife, Jessie, goes on the list. You're the Hamiltons. We heard from them at trial. You're Jeff Vickers for Premier Bank and all of their shareholders. These are just a few victims that we know, but you stand for us all. You stand for our communities, our charities, our churches, our neighbors, and our futures. Since our previous sentence date of January 29th, she has been granted additional 48 days of undeserved freedom she's used to falsely claim her innocence and that she's actually paid the victims in full. All of this we know is false. I have to say, that is pretty bold. If you are you still have not been sentenced in your federal sentence, and you know that part of what it's going to require is that you pay the victims back, that's going to be in the court. To tell people that you've already done that, to publicly say that, wow. But it obviously was unsuccessful because he ordered her to pay all this money back. The hope is that she can work as a pharmacist, earn the money once she gets out. All of this we know is false. Another malicious attempt to pass blame and avoid responsibility. These attacks on the victims will continue until she is finally incarcerated. It must end with you, Your Honor. Betrayal is not something that is reimbursed through restitution. It is only recouped through the sentencing of Natalie Cochran. Because of that, we strongly oppose any consideration for her to self-report to prison. Her sentencing has basically been continued 3 times. This is more than adequate time. I'm going to skip through this. Her lack of remorse and accountability over the past 2 years alone should earn her direct removal to prison. The victims deserve better, and she should be taken forthwith. Exodus 14:14 says, "The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace." All the victims here have done that for almost 2 years. Let us now be heard. Thank you, Your Honor. Wow. Just wow. So that is when you saw him on the stand, that's pretty much what he was thinking the whole time. That is how he feels about what happened to him. You can imagine how difficult it must have been for him to come and to testify at trial based on all of what had happened to him and based on his feelings and his emotions about that. So the next one is shockingly emotional, and it's not one you would think would be. This is a guy from Premier Bank. Now, we haven't heard from this guy at the trial. We did hear from Bank of America, but we didn't hear from Premier Bank. But you would think, okay, this is going to be kind of dry. This is a guy who's just a banker, and maybe they lost some money and he's testifying on behalf of the bank. It's not like that. This is really kind of intense. So let's take a look at that. They take a little break. So here is Jeff Vickers. I'm a divisional president for Premier Bank. I've been doing this my whole life. Started as a teller when I was in college, worked my way up. A majority of what I've done my whole life is commercial lending, specifically trying to help small businesses. In 20 some years of doing this, I've seen every type of criminal, crook, liar, manipulative, financially manipulative package, and they all pale in comparison to what Natalie Cochran did. She wants to say that she's a victim here because this was Michael's doing. Well, Michael and Natalie approached the bank and came to us with their financials and made a request. Well, we declined it based upon that information. And it wasn't until Michael was out of the way that she really elevated and escalated the level of deceit and lies. The next time we meet, new tax returns, financial records, DFAs, emails, everything. All these contracts that you've heard about. We met with Natalie. I brought another senior member from the bank, and you'd sit there and ask her questions, and she could just spit out a lie. And that lie then would lead to, or her answer would lead then to other questions. And she couldn't know all of them, but she never missed a beat. Lie after lie after lie. And we asked her, how is she able to do all of this? Of course, Senator Manchin letters, all this other stuff, and she sat there. Of course, I'm a woman-owned business in a HUD zone that's Native American because she claimed Native American blood as well. Native American kind of took us back. Oh, yes, I'm Native American. That's what puts me in the top 5% of supplier providers for the Department of Defense. I mean, that's a huge claim. Top 5% of suppliers for the Department of Defense. That is huge. I mean, that is a very large claim. She, of course, wrote down once, Michael, I give it all back to him. I give the $400 million back if he was just here. Well, there was no $400 million. And we thought after the fact, there were no tears either when she made that statement. So long and short, with all the financial information, we extended her a loan. Ultimately, that loan defaulted on the first payment. That's when my life changed because despite an almost perfect record over 20 some years in lending, it says I had been defrauded by her lies and manipulation. I think that's what he meant to say. I was written up by my boss. I guess he means by my boss. My lending authority was reduced. The one thing I prided myself on in helping small business was having individual lending authority so I could sit across the table from them and help make a decision for legitimate businesses and help them meet their goals. I also came under scrutiny by the executive management within the bank and then further by the board of directors. I started losing sleep. Every day I thought I'd come to work and there would be an HR director sitting there with my boss ready to let me go. My blood pressure shot up. I never knew from one day to the next if I had a job. At the end of every year, I get a little bonus based upon my performance from the year before. It's not a big bonus. It's not some Bank of America type bonus you would get to keep these type of contracts, but it was a bonus enough that allowed me to take my kids on a little vacation and put a little money in their 529 plans. Well, my bonus was almost all but eliminated. So there wasn't a vacation. There wasn't a 529 plan contribution. And that, for those of you who don't know, that's a fund for sending your kids to college, and it has some tax advantages. Instead, I held every little bit I could in anticipation of losing my job, something I've worked hard at for years. So that wasn't enough. Life started to move on and things started getting a little bit better. I did not lose my job, thankfully. I remained under a probationary period. And so life started going on, even though the bank continued to spend an enormous amount of resources and money with lawyers and everything trying to chase Miss Cochran, who ultimately filed bankruptcy. I thought things were getting back to normal and this would resolve itself. My kids have attended school in Greenbrier County their whole lives. And then all of a sudden, Natalie Cochran decides to take her kids and put them in the same school system as mine, because I'm assuming she didn't want the embarrassment of being in this area. So now I'm seeing her at pickup lines, at drop-off lines, at football games, at practices, at everything. So it all came back again. Then I'm having to still live with this with my bosses, and she's just out and about, can take her kids to wherever she wants to go. It started again right before they had the initial trial scheduled for her. And I believe they mean the federal trial. She started, and I'm a potential witness in this federal trial. She starts taking pictures of me at practices as I'm coming in and as I'm going. And the final straw is I pulled in and she videotapes me coming by. Here I am supposed to be a federal witness. There was all these other allegations about her and Michael and everything. I was fearful for my life. I was fearful for my kids' lives. This isn't fair. We've lived here our whole lives. We didn't do anything wrong. So I ended up having to call the state police and saying, I need this to stop. They, of course, made the appropriate calls to the prosecutors, and I'm assuming to her attorney, and they did, but it was too late. Natalie Cochran is not a victim. She's created a room full of victims. This doesn't bother her whatsoever, and it hasn't. She lives the life. You see pictures of her at the Greenbrier at Christmas time, having dinner, going to parties. I mean, she's not been impacted by this whatsoever. Everyone in here else has. And so, again, she is not a victim. And I ask you that you sentence her accordingly. So I told you that was extremely emotional, not at all what you were thinking or expecting when you hear, oh, a banker is going to make a statement. I don't know the truth or accuracy of anything he says. I don't know whether Natalie Cochran took photographs of him, took videos of him. I don't know anything about his job. I just know that was a very impactful victim statement. It was unusually so for someone who just was testifying related to the bank's loss, but it also included a loss to him. And he expressed that very particularly. So in this particular case, though, I don't really, I can't say whether or not the specifics of what he said are true. I just can say that that's what he said in federal court. And I thought it was pretty meaningful and important. All right, and now we're going to go to Stephanie Hamilton. And this may be the last we can fit in before the jury gets back. Is there somebody, maybe y'all can tell me if they come back? I think 1:15 was the time, but maybe put that in the chat and I'll watch. I've got my phone here, but I can't look at everything. Okay, so we heard from Stephanie Hamilton at trial. She is a physician's assistant, possibly Natalie's best friend. She actually came out to see Michael during that hours when he was lying on the couch. And she says, I told Natalie, take him to the hospital. Natalie didn't want to do it. She said Michael would be mad because he didn't like hospitals. And I told her, blame me. Say you called in a physician's assistant. The physician's assistant said he needed to go, but Natalie still didn't take him. So she talked about a text message that Natalie sent her 2 days before Michael died. And in this text message, Natalie asked for steroids and said she could administer them herself. She said she was coughing, vomiting, fever, and thought that steroids would be helpful to her. Stephanie herself actually invested in Natalie's company as well, somewhere between $15,000 and $17,000. And we know that because at the murder trial, the defense lawyer, Natalie's lawyer, asked Stephanie, you have $15,000 to $17,000 worth of disliking my client, don't you? And she said, yes, but we continued our friendship. And she said, I don't dislike her. I try to find the good in everyone. I don't like the actions that she did. So let's see. Let me make sure. Oh, here we go. Right there. Okay. I'm Stephanie Hamilton, was working some weekends for an urgent care company along with a full-time job. Miss Cochran, who I have been, quote, friends with for about 3 months, started talking to me about investing. It says investigating. I think she means investing, or maybe the transcript is incorrect, in government contracts. When she first mentioned it, I did not fully understand how the contracts worked. She told me to watch the movie War Dogs to better understand how they got the idea to start their business. We've heard several references to that, and we've heard that was Michael's favorite movie. I haven't seen it, so if you've seen it, tell us what you thought. My son, 13 at the time, was getting ready to have a major surgery that was going to take a year to recover. At the time, we thought we were facing lymphoma with him. Thank God it was not. Miss Cochran used that tactic to pull me into so-called government contracts. She was persuasive, saying that this would enable me to be home more with my family and take care of my son. At first, she offered me money per contract just to consult as a medical provider. In fact, we saw one of those text messages today in court. To make things seem legit and real, she needed my medical license number. We didn't see that one in court today. Natalie told me several times that because I was working with government, that I was not allowed to talk to anyone about the business, and it was confidential what we were doing, which I will say is kind of the opposite of a Ponzi scheme. Usually you would want the early investors to go out and tell other people so that you get later investors more of them, because you're dependent on it looking like a pyramid. You're dependent on more money coming in later so you can funnel it down to pay off these people. Eventually, though, it's going to fail. Eventually, you can't get enough investors with more to pay downward. As time went on, when money was supposed to have been paid, she would send me a list of contracts that I could pay into to flip my money with promises of doubling it. She told me Michael's mom, Donna, had been doing them and she no longer wanted to work with her. I asked her if Michael was okay with that, and she told me that he did not want his mom working for them either. My husband fell and had to have urgent surgery for a shoulder injury and was out of work. A week later, I was told my full-time job was cutting to part-time as we were closing. Things were getting hard financially. I had cleaned out my savings to give to Miss Cochran. I had been saving up my weekend pays to do a big house remodel. I had also taken out 2 bank loans to pay money to her, which I am still paying on. That would be so galling. I paid all that money, and even now you're still paying because you took a loan. With all the financial difficulties, I would talk to Natalie about some of my payouts. There were always excuses. Example, the state police had my accounts locked up because of Michael's death. The government is on shutdown, and many more. She even went to lengths to fake an illness, cancer, to use as a tactic to detract people she owed money to. And let's stop for just a minute and talk about the cancer, because as I played yesterday, that little clip, when under questioning from the defense, her doctor was asked, so we just don't know whether she has cancer, do we? And he said, that's fair. And I will say this, if she really had cancer, because it's an issue in this case, she would simply produce the documents that say she has cancer. Instead, in 2019, she was telling people she was undergoing radiation, undergoing chemotherapy, had cancer, and her own doctor was unable to even document that she had cancer. And at that point, she only wanted to be diagnosed, not already had radiation and chemo. And this was after she had told people she was having radiation and chemo. So none of it fits and makes sense. And if she had really had cancer, I think they would have brought those documents. I certainly would have. That would be something I would want to show people, to say, hey, I really did have cancer. The only testimony we have positively, one way or the other, was the testimony from Natalie's daughter, who said, yes, my mom had cancer. Other than that, we've got nothing. Okay. Every single time my money was due, there was an excuse, or there was an even better list of government contracts with promises of more return. I remember her always saying, you are going to be just fine. You will pay off your student loans and be financially free. On her TSG website, she advertised she was a woman-owned small business and boasted her pharmacy degree, claiming to be a controlled substance distributor for the government. She would always say she had first dibs on the contracts because she was an American Indian female running a small business. She would try to get old friends to separate because she did not want them talking to each other in case they would figure out that things were not adding up. She took advantage of her real friends through a fake cancer diagnosis, once taking her to doctor's appointments, providing food for her family and her. Wow. So people brought her meals. Wow. Anyway, I even went to make cancer t-shirts for her and her family and friends. Wow. Wow. Okay. And to date, we still don't really know. I'm just telling you, my suspicions come down on the side of the defense would have presented it. If the defense had the evidence, we would have the evidence. We would know about the evidence. Asking her doctor and just saying we still don't know doesn't really answer it. It seems to me something so easily provable by the defense. Also, take a look at this part about the promises that were made to Stephanie, why she invested. We've heard none of that in the murder case. I think that's a completely correct decision by the state. If the state made the decision, the judge, if the judge kept it out, because it's not truly relevant. These are the kinds of things that make you think about a person in a certain way, but that don't necessarily mean that the person committed this particular murder. And that's what the task of the state is, proving she committed the murder of Michael Cochran, or as we talked about earlier, manslaughter. That's now going to be an option for the jury. So after this, I'm going to run a poll over on the community page because the evidence is closed. I would like to know, what do you think at this stage? And we'll probably start with, what do you think the jury is going to do? And then as soon as the jury goes out, I'll ask, what would you do? So we'll start with jury. That'll be the first poll. But anyway, look for that over on the community side. If you haven't hit the like button too, would you do that? It would be real help to get the video out. And also subscribe. We go live at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be live 7 p.m. Eastern tonight. All right. One day on a lunch date with Miss Cochran and her mother, Miss Jessup, Natalie kept saying she was waiting on a big deal to drop. Her mother started telling me that Natalie was one of the top gun salespersons in the United States. Natalie was shaking her head and smiling the whole time. The story went on. She had sold all the guns needed for the wall being built on the Mexico border. Wow, that's pretty bold, huh? And it's to her mother, and her mother's like so proud of her. Like, that's amazing, honey. The stories and lies were always amazing. She lived a life of luxury to bait everyone into her scheme. So we talked earlier about the border reference. Here it is. She, according to Stephanie Hamilton, said she sold all the guns needed for the wall being built on the Mexico border. And this was back in 2019, possibly 2018. On May of 2019, after much harassment, she finally put a check into my bank account for a small portion of my funds. 3 days later, the bank called me and told me the check had bounced. I called Miss Cochran to let her know about the check. Of course, there were more excuses about the feds locking up accounts. She was meeting with lawyers to get them unlocked. And remember, what's important about this right here, this is after Michael has died. So the Ponzi scheme is continuing, and Michael's not around to continue it. So at a minimum, it showed that the Ponzi scheme was at least in part being run by Natalie. It doesn't prove Michael was not involved, that he had no knowledge, but it does prove that Natalie clearly was involved. And that's why I think she pled guilty to this. She did issue another check 4 weeks later, which again bounced. Miss Cochran did not care about people or their well-being. She was a phony, all-American mom who manipulated and took advantage of an entire community. She used religion and her self-proclaimed introverted personality disorder to deceive and defraud everyone. She quoted Bible verses through texts and social media. She used those tactics to gain more victims for her scheme. She hurt people that deeply cared for her and her family. After Detective Bledsoe called me in and I found out the truth of the scheme, I was still trying to take up for her. After days, I was sad, hurt, and then I became angry. I went through a lot of anxiety and depression. I had to see my primary care doctor to get put on medications for depression and anxiety. We were struggling financially as I was part-time and my husband was still out of work as well. My son was recovering from his surgery and going through many emotions as well, realizing the money I had saved up, I had just thrown off the bridge. The bank loans were still going to be my responsibility. She gifted my son a hunting bow. It was later taken because we found out that she purchased the bow with money she had stolen from the baseball league. So let's just stop right there, okay? I don't know if it gets any more fighting words in the U.S. than stealing from the Little League. For those of you outside the U.S., the Little League is the name for a younger group of people usually playing baseball. And in this particular case, it was. Now, one place I read, one article said that the money was stolen from the baseball team to give to the football team, which raises an entirely new level of ire from the baseball parents. I don't know, taking the bow may have been part of reimbursing it and may have been part of what the state or the federal government did to reimburse victims. As far as I know, I was not able to find at any point that she was prosecuted or pled guilty, had any consequences related to stealing money from the Little League, from the baseball league. I don't know whether it happened or not. I just know that there were allegations about it. that were in the newspaper. There were allegations about it, as you can hear right here in the sentencing hearing. If she is put on a light term, she is just getting a slap on the wrist. I feel she should have maximum sentence. She has never shown an ounce of remorse or regret. She's continued to parade around the community in Lewisburg and blame everything on her deceased husband. She's continued to run the scheme after his death. So I want you all to think about this too, and we'll go ahead. We don't have a lot of time. They haven't started back yet, have they? Okay, no, I don't think so. All right. I want you to think about and understand why it is that the court limited this evidence and why it is that it's so separate. I mean, in your mind, you can think of the fact that, okay, someone could be a terrible fraudster and not murder somebody. You can think that, you can know that intellectually. But when you hear all of this, it becomes really difficult to separate your opinion of that person from the crime they are charged with right now. It's really hard to do that separation. So I would like y'all to comment on that. What do you think about that? Does it hearing all this, does it change your opinion of Natalie? Does it give you a different view of her? Let me know about that. But as I say, it's not fully in the case. It's partially in the case, the murder case. She took 2 payments from me in April and May after his death. She is still trying to tell people lies about what she did. And when they say payments after his death, they mean she kept going with the fraud. She is a danger to the community, as in the past, she tried to get innocent people tried for stealing money from leagues when she was doing it all alone to her friends and family. We heard a little bit about that in the interview with Jessica Farish that I did. She's a local news reporter, and she talked a little bit about what these allegations were about stealing money, about getting people jailed for stealing money that they hadn't stolen. She is still trying to use deceit and play the victim. We are the victims here. She has not been on any kind of home confinement. One key point I want to leave you with: I never spoke to Michael Cochran about contracts or money. She needs to be punished for the lies, deceit, and manipulation and pain that she put her true friends and family through. How can someone fake cancer? So many people die every day from such a horrible disease. I am sure if COVID-19 were around then, she would have had it too and been on a ventilator. We need to make sure she will never do this again. I plead for maximum sentence. Thank you. All right. And Jerry Brody is a new member. Welcome, Jerry. I'm so glad. We'll go ahead and stop there. I think that's plenty to give us a good idea. And I'm very curious what y'all think. They haven't started back yet. So, yep, haven't started back yet. So I'll take a question or two, but mostly I want to save those for tonight. If you have a question, put question marks at the beginning, and then we will, then it'll be easier to spot. I'll have a much better shot as the chat runs by deciding it. So, good decision not to let it in. Totally prejudicial. I agree with you, Melissa. Melissa is saying that. I agree. Ironically, I think she'll be convicted on past acts, Kay Schmidt says, because they are in. Maybe not all of them, but they are in. The defendant had to admit that she was a horrible person or something like that. It was an admission from the defense lawyer that she was a bad girl. He kept calling her a bad girl. So they were unable to do that. Sharon can separate the fraud from the crime. It's critically important that that be done, but it's hard, but it is critically important. Okay, so I said my husband would not let me, says Sarah. My son is battling pancreatic cancer. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry, Denisha. That's terrible. Okay, I'm not seeing questions. Y'all come back tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern. I will look forward to seeing you then.